Hello, my creative friends, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Prompt. Happy Wednesday if you're watching this in real time as we go along, or if you are catching up at some future point and you've decided to line up the days of the week with the days that these were originally released upon. It would give you a sense of the journey in real time, but keep in mind that the episodes themselves are not specifically tied to a day of the week, at least so far. We may be changing that ahead, but at least at this point, we're really just doing one step per day. We're not even doing a step, really, because as I tried to explain, as I will explain again in a couple of episodes, it's not about... I can't take you through a step-by-step journey with this, but what I can do is I can give you something to spark action every single day. The only way you're ever going to achieve what you set out to achieve, this goal, this dream, this ambition, this plan, the only way to achieve it is to take daily action. So the point of this series is to fill your head with ideas and spark inspiration or teach you something or help you see something from a slightly different angle and really ponder that, filter that through your own way of looking at the world, through your own experiences, and then not just sort of sit on it or dwell on it, but actually to take action. If you haven't taken action up to this point, or if you've really been very thinky about all this, you've been pondering, you've been sort of going over it in your mind, in your imagination, but you haven't really taken action, please take action. It's so vital. It's what pushes us forward. Don't worry about not having taken action up to this point. The past is the past. The past will always be the past. There's nothing we can do to change the past, to get us wherever we got to this day, this very moment. All of it is done. There's no changing it. You can't do anything about it. All that matters is what's happening from here, moving forward. We build for tomorrow, not for yesterday. So, at the end of the day, the key here is to take action today, to move forward today, to continue to take steps tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and to prepare yourself so that you actually will take those steps. So, sorry for a little bit of... not exactly what the title of this video is about, but an important point, an important message to really take on board and really make your own anyway. Today, what we're going to talk about is the opposition. Past couple of episodes, we've talked about story, and then we talked about the vehicle through which we experience story, which is the character. And now today, what I want to talk about is the opposition, the antagonist, the opposing force. You've probably heard the old cliche adage, which is fundamentally true. It's axiomatic, which is that all drama is conflict. In other words, what makes something dramatic is that you have two opposing forces. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we need to have a good guy and a bad guy that battle it out, as in every superhero movie. At the end of the day, all stories are going to have an opposing force. All effective stories, all stories that are going to that are going to be compelling to watch are going to have in some way some opposing force. If you ever watch movies and sort of realize movies are all about characters experiencing problems. It's all about, this is the worst day in this person's life, and here they are dealing with this worst thing or this terrible thing that's happened. Well, that's because all drama is conflict. At the end of the day, the thing that makes it compelling to watch is if I had a goal and I set out to achieve that goal and I just went boop, 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 and I achieved it, well, okay, cool. Whatever. You're not going to be as emotionally invested as if when I set out to achieve that goal, I'm hit by obstacles. I'm hit by continuously bigger and bigger obstacles. That's going to give me something to do, to overcome, to get around, to sidestep, to bulldoze through whatever it is, to overcome the obstacle to achieve the goal. It's in the view, it's in the watching of a character overcoming obstacles or facing whatever opposition comes at them and dealing with that, finding a way to get to their goal or maybe not get to their goal because of what's happened. It's the story happens in that battle. And when I say battle, it doesn't have to mean guns and people shooting at each other or chase scenes or action. It can be a simple character drama. If you have a character that is experiencing something at home and it's really just a relationship story, and it's the guy wants to have a better relationship with his partner, and she's not she's losing interest or whatever, that conflict is the opposition that we're talking about. So it doesn't have to be good guy, bad guy, but pretty much every story can benefit from having opposition. And so today I want to talk about how opposition happens. What my take on what it means, how to build it, how to create opposition that's actually effective, and how to use it to build the story that you're trying to build. Now, again, if you haven't seen the previous two episodes of this, I am sort of building the idea a little bit here. So if you haven't seen, I can't remember the numbers now. If you haven't seen two ago, maybe watch that one and maybe watch the character one before this. But what we really want, by the way, conflict, the cough. As soon as I set out to do this vlog, I developed a cold from my kid going to daycare. And then now I have this cough that I can't shake. It's conflict, which is exciting to watch, but terrible to hear, which is why I ducked the audio for it. Anyway, where was I? So look, I totally lost my train of thought. I'll watch it back and go, you should have stayed on that train of thought. Anyway, so look, at the end of the day, conflict or opposition is going to be the thing that most stands in the way of your character getting to whatever goal they've set for themselves. So opposition can often come from a character that in theory supports the central character. It can be in theory from a friend or from another good guy. They just are perhaps in conflict. They both want the same goal. You can have two people that want the same goal. Both are very nice people, but at the end of the day, only one's going to get that thing. So that becomes conflict. That becomes opposition. So when we talk about opposition, there are different kinds of opposition. There's external opposition, there's internal opposition, there's situational opposition, there's physical opposition. And I'm not categorizing things here. I know now people are going to go, what is physical opposition? Anyway, so let me just try to clarify the idea. One of the reasons good guys versus bad guys is such a sort of quintessential story dynamic is because the thing that's going to make drama most effective, the thing that's going to make a movie most impactful is to take a situation or an idea, to take a conflict and dramatize it, make it visual. When you have a character who is pursuing something, and then you have an opponent character, a villain or an antagonist or the bad guy, the person standing in that person's way. What you give yourself is the opportunity to take an idea and make it tangible. We can watch the argument play out. It's not just some hypothetical, theoretical discussion about this idea versus that idea. We're watching two people go at it, and the ideas come out through that. So what we really want to do is make whatever your journey, whatever that arc is, whatever that change is in your story, we can give the traditional way of doing it, the sort of traditional hero-driven story, is all about a character going through a series of events and the character changes. Now, if a character just goes through a series of events, with no conflict, there's not really going to be any change. The opposition gives us the pushback. The opposition is the thing which potentially stops the character, which gives them those obstacles that then they have to overcome. So the reason to create an opponent or a villain or an antagonist character is so that we can take the general opposition, the general thing the character has to fight and push against, and give it a face, give it a personality, make it something tangible. And in that way, we're watching two forces played out as two characters going at it. And that's the kind of drama, that's the kind of conflict, that's the kind of entertainment, that's the kind of story that human beings are generally generally drawn to, because that's how we experience things in life. We don't experience things as hypothetical scenarios. We go try to achieve the thing that we want to achieve, and some damn person stands in our way, right? So that's because that's how we generally experience life. That's how stories are generally more effective. Now, you don't need to have, technically speaking, you don't need to have a villain. You don't need to have an opponent. And again, there's no right or wrong. There's no good or bad. There's effective or ineffective. If you tell a story without an opponent, with just simply an opposing force, or maybe an internal opposition, the characters battling with themselves as they're trying to do this or trying to do that, their internal opposition is standing in their own way, it's probably not going to be quite as effective, at least in movie form, because we can't watch the internal battle happen unless you have some sort of voiceover, which is usually telling the story. It's not revealing the story. It's not taking us through the journey of the story. So what we like to do, generally speaking, in movies anyway, and in most stories, is to create an opponent or an opposition character. Strictly speaking, Mother Nature could be the opponent, a person against the elements, and they're fighting the hurricane is coming in, and they have to try to struggle to get to Grandpa or whatever it might be, right? And so that could be quite a compelling story. In that case, you wouldn't necessarily have to have an opponent. It might be too much to have some villainous robber who's been trying to steal from Grandpa, and it might be too much to the story. So all story is contextual for that reason. It's really about what is that change, what is the story, what's the meaning we're trying to get across, and then which of these details and dynamics are we going to include in what way, in what order. And there are as many different possibilities as there are people, as there are human experience and human imagination. So to think in general about opposition, to think in general about how are we going to add drama and conflict and make our story interesting. At the end of the day, the human brain can suss out a situation pretty quickly. I read some statistics somewhere at some point along the way, if you know, put it in the comments, that when you walk into a room, within 2 minutes, your brain has already taken stock of and understands everything that's in this room, and there's nothing new to see. There's nothing interesting anymore, generally, which is why we often want different shots. We want to cut to this angle and cut to that angle, because we're adding sort of visual variety to stories to keep the brain engaged and keep the brain interested. Maybe both. So because this is the nature of our brain and our imagination, we want to make sure that a story, particularly a long-form story, and this is one of the main differences between short film and feature film. A short film, you basically just have an idea and you can grab somebody's interest or say something, capture, create a visual, whatever it is, and 10 minutes later you're done. A feature-length story, a long-form story, you have to hold and sustain and find new ways to keep the audience interested over the span of an hour and a half. And that is, I think, the skill and the unique sort of angle. I think that skill set is going to be applicable to a much wider array of media. So that's why I tend to focus on long-form story, on movies, on television. The point that I'm getting at is the opposition and the challenges that the character is going to face are going to give us those story twists and turns, which, like walking into a room and knowing immediately, okay, cool, yep, I got the lay of the land, cool, I'm ready. What else have you got? We want to introduce new things. We want to create... we want to add visual variety. We want to give the brain something to continue to focus on. The twists and turns of our story do that as well. So we don't just want a character going on a very linear single journey. We want to have the twists and turns. We want to have the ups and downs, not just for visual variety though, but because we want to take the audience on some sort of an emotional roller coaster through the story. As they set about on their path, if they identify a goal for whatever reason, the example I always used to give in my screenwriting workshops was a guy comes home. He's a long haul flight attendant. In other words, he does these giant sort of 18-hour trips. He comes home, pulls the key out of his pocket, goes to put it in his front door, and realizes his house is burned down. So now the story becomes, well, how did my house burn down? What happened? Right? So he ends up talking to a detective or whatever it might be. As the detective relays the information to him, so the pennies start to drop and the pieces start to come together, and he starts to realize, oh, his girlfriend might have burned it down. Well, now the story becomes, where's she? Let's find her. Let's examine this. Let's open up this story, right? Conflict and opposition and opposing characters give you those story twists and turns. Now, keep in mind, with every story twist and turn, you're changing the nature of the story and potentially the meaning and the point that the story gives out, that the audience is going to take away from the story. So when you think about creating opposition for your story, remember that just like character, it too is a function of story. So you don't want to just throw in obstacles. You don't want to just throw in, let's make it harder for him this way. Let's throw this at him. Let's, like the Truman Show, where it's just like, what else can we throw at him to get in his way? In your story, you're going to want to make sure that all of the opposition, all of the conflict comes out of and in response to, or in some way conflicts with your character's goal, their target. What is it that they're trying to do? What is it that they're trying to achieve or discover or solve? At the end of the day, the opposition is the roadblock to your character getting what they've set out to achieve. And the opposition, therefore, becomes something that the character has to find a way around or through to get what they're trying to achieve. Now, their success or failure in doing that determines whether they get what they want in the end or they don't get what they want in the end. And either way gives off some sort of meaning or message. So as a storyteller, as someone who's creating stories for an audience to enjoy and experience, what we really want to do is make sure that the opposition that we create is strong and is effective and is relevant to the story that we're trying to tell. So if you're going to make the opposition a villain character, an antagonist, or someone who's the bad guy, right? You're going to need to use some of the same things we talked about yesterday in the character episode, where you're going to need to make sure that that's a three-dimensional character. You're going to need to make sure that that's a potentially flawed character. If you have a very cardboard cutout, paint-by-numbers villain twirling the mustache bad guy, it's not going to be as believable. You're not giving your central character enough to overcome. You're not giving them a real person to face off. So if you take a character who has some sort of a goal, and as they go through that goal, then something changes and the meaning comes out of that. If you don't give them a challenging enough journey, then the end story is going to feel quite flat. It's going to feel quite thin. It's going to feel... It's not going to feel like we've actually been through an experience or anything with any substance or meaning. It's going to feel like fluff, like popcorn. If you watch some of the big budget movies where it's all about the visual effects, but the story's kind of largely that's what happens, is they have characters that are ill-defined. And so you don't have any substance, you don't have any gravitas, you don't have any meaning, you don't have any poignancy to the story or the situation that you're asking the audience to go through. So when the audience tries to go on that ride, okay, well, you showed me lots of dazzling imagery on the screen, but what did it add up to? It didn't mean anything, because the villain he's not a real person. So therefore, the character trying to get what they're trying to get, they weren't really stopped by anything real. It was this cartoonish character. So when you're creating your opposition, or when you're thinking about opposition, or when you're trying to design opposition for your story, always remember that the opposition has to have the same humanity that you're giving your character. In order for your story to feel real and true and authentic, you want to make sure they're sort of on par. So if your character, your central character, has some flaws and has some, skeletons in the closet or whatever, they're not, they're the lawyer that really hates law or that kind of a thing, make sure that the opposition character is the same thing, is not the same thing, but has the same uniqueness to them, has the same complexity. That's going to make for a stronger story. At the end of the day, it all really comes back to what kind of story are you trying to tell? What is the meaning of that story? What are you trying to convey to an audience? If you're trying to tell a very archetypal good guy versus bad guy story, nothing necessarily wrong with that. Imagine like a kid's film or something that's very archetypal, right? We don't want too much complexity because kids aren't necessarily quite nuanced enough to understand some of the, so you want something simpler so it can be really good guy versus bad guy. Everything about story, everything in storytelling is context-based, has to do with what are you trying to say, how are you trying to say it, and then what details are you using to actually enact that. And everything comes back to, is it effective or ineffective? There's no good or bad. I like to say also that there's no such thing as a bad screenplay. I just don't think there's ever such thing as a bad. You can't read a screenplay and go, that's a bad screenplay. You can say that is an early draft. You can say that is a screenplay that needs work, needs improvement, but I firmly believe you can improve any screenplay that's out there, any draft that's out there. A screenplay is not finished until it's finished, and most people are sending out screenplays that are not finished. And that's the big problem. So if you change your thinking and you look at what you've already written or what you're working on now, and instead of thinking, this is terrible, this is bad, I'm an awful writer, whatever it might be, start focusing on what's ineffective about this and how can I make it more effective. That's going to be the key to getting there. So as you start designing characters, as you start designing opposition to those characters and what that opposition character actually looks like, always continually focus on how do I make this more effective for what I'm trying to say, for the story that I'm trying to tell and the meaning that I'm ultimately trying to get across to the audience itself. So let's turn this into a daily prompt for you. You can probably see where we're going with today's daily prompt, right? Who's the opposition in your story? Is it a person? Is it a force of nature? Is it just a situation? The situation itself is something that the character has to overcome and navigate, the complexities of something that they didn't realize before. Opposition is what gets in the way of your character trying to achieve whatever they've set out to achieve or whatever situation the story has thrust upon them. So, who is your opposition? If you're already working on something, is your opposition strong? Is your opposition the most effective possible opposition for what you're trying to say, for the story you're trying to tell, for the character, this particular unique character? Remember, different characters going to make different choices, going to ultimately require different opposition to be as effective. Right? To use the example from yesterday, if we have the man and the African American woman and you imagine them going on two different paths, you can't just have the same bad guy on both paths because really it might be more effective for one. That you might need to adapt and adjust it for the other to make that story fully work. This is part of the challenge of screenwriting. Sometimes you write a great script, we go, we love it, fantastic. The people that we can find, the actors that we get, or the casting combination that seems to work best for the chemistry of the actors and all that kind of stuff might be different to what the script was. So do we need to adapt and adjust and modify the project so that the story is told as effectively or in the same end result? But we've tweaked, we've adjusted those dynamics along the way to make sure that it actually works. It's effective in its current iteration, in the production iteration of it. So anyway, another one of those challenging things. So for today's daily prompt, all I want you to do really, if you want to, this is obviously up to you, is take a look at your project. If you're creating something new, ask yourself, what is the opposition in the first place? If you don't have an opposition character yet, could there be an opposition character that will force your central character to have a greater degree of difficulty getting the thing that they're setting out to get? Because if you do that, then you visualize, you make visual, and you exacerbate the challenge that they have to face. You're going to create a better, more engaging and entertaining story. So ask yourself, what is your current opposition? How can you make it into a person? Is that going to be more effective to do so? If you're already working on something, who's the opposition? Who's the character? Look at it from 3 different angles, right? And say, well, okay, is this the most effective thing? Is this the best way to highlight and tell this? How can I make this more effective? So if you've got 5 minutes, spend 5 minutes on it. That's it. That's okay. If that's all you have today, honestly, I know I've chewed up a lot of your writing time already just watching this video, but take 5 minutes before you move forward. If you've got an hour, put an hour into it. If you've got 10 hours, spend all day on it. The more time you can put into it, the more you're getting closer to that 10,000 hour rule. Even if it's 5 minutes, you're still chipping away at your 10,000 hour rule. So don't let today pass you by. Take some time. The day, the time, the clutter, the scheduling conflicts, that's your opposition. It's not necessarily a person that you're fighting against. It's not you. It's the time constraint. Figure out a strategy so that you can overcome the opposition. Because that and getting where you're trying to go is what your story is all about. That kind of works. I don't know, maybe a little cheesy, but thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.